All right, government kids. Hope you're enjoying your quarantine time. Hope you guys aren't going too crazy. A few things before we get rolling here with the lecture. I've decided to give one more lecture on the judicial branch. I'm going to focus on your rights as a student with part 4. We're going to go through a history of how your civil liberties have been defined in schools. And I think it's a pretty interesting lecture series that I'm going to do there. I always am interested to see how the Supreme Court makes decisions. Just to give you guys a little teaser with that, there was one court case, and it's kind of a recent court case, that made a decision that a student could not have a sign at a parade, a school function parade, that said "Bong hits for Jesus." All right, I'll tell the full story of that one next week after we come back from Easter break. It's pretty comical and kind of bizarre how all that went down, and that's one of my favorite stories to tell in any social studies class, for real. Now, a few things. The only thing that I have assigned to you guys this week, I assigned some more court cases through Edpuzzle. That's all I'm going to have you guys do the rest of the week. Tomorrow, I moved the lecture to today so that tomorrow you guys can do a catch-up day, kind of, sort of. And if you're behind on anything in Google Classroom, just work on it tomorrow, get caught up tomorrow. Guys, I'm also taking late grades for literally anything, okay? For second semester, that is. So please email me if you have a concern about your grades. Please email me if you got a bunch of stuff done in Google Classroom before we went on break, and I will adjust your grades accordingly. Now, we will be on break Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday I'll come back, and it's still looking like we're going to be online, of course. On Tuesday I'll come back with our weekly schedule, and I might change the lecture day. I haven't decided yet. That might still be on Thursday. I'm doing this a day early just so that you guys can go through Google Classroom and see what's going on there. Now, as far as the lecture, I'm going to get rolling into the lecture. We went through the early court cases and how the Supreme Court got its power with judicial review, and how federalism and federal power was expanded through the judicial branch. Well, today we're going to take a look at probably what are considered to be the worst decisions in Supreme Court history. Now, in social studies, in history, we don't say good or bad. All right. Now, there are things that are absolutely wrong, and you should have studied things like the Holocaust, for example, slavery, things like that. Those are absolutely wrong because they restrict our civil liberties, our civil rights, either to life, to freedom, etc. And when I say that it's a blunder, the Supreme Court, they are actually restricting people's rights. They are taking people's rights away, and most historians, most constitutional scholars, most constitutional law professors, they will look at these and say, yeah, we messed up. The Supreme Court messed up. So I'm not the only one who's saying this, and you'll see what I'm saying once we go through. I picked 4 court cases to look at that are considered to be the worst mistakes biggest blunders of the Supreme Court. And then we are going to look at how civil liberties have been expanded. Now, there's a lot of court cases out there that have done that. I picked the absolute biggest hitters and the most important court cases that have expanded civil liberties over the years. Now, I am taking out court cases like Tinker v. Des Moines that expanded your rights as a student, your First Amendment rights as a student. I'm not going to include that in this lecture. That's going to be lecture number 4. And I just think it's going to be an interesting trek to go through your liberties, your rights as a student according to what the Supreme Court says. So I tried my best to put these court cases in chronological order for you, and I'm giving you guys just the bare minimum, the bare minimum story. And remember, when we're studying court cases, yeah, the history is important. The era that it came out of is important. But the most important thing is how it impacted our government, our country, and people's rights. So the impact of the court case is the most important. So, Supreme Court blunders. Yeah, now this is actually a book I've read. I recommend it. It's quite interesting. And we're not going to cover 13 of these Supreme Court blunders, if you will. That's kind of where I get this name because I love this book so much. And these are considered to be the lowest points of our Supreme Court. Now, we know that other branches, they've messed up along the way too, so I don't want to exclude the executive branch or the legislative branch here, because ultimately some of these laws were written by Congress and signed by the president. So it's not like, hey, the Supreme Court is the worst branch of government. It's just they're kind of all equal, all responsible for these huge mistakes. Now, I always start off, now there's other earlier court cases you can delve into. There's other court cases you can look at where the Supreme Court messed up, but ultimately, like I told you guys, I picked the most important ones. Now, Dred Scott versus Stanford. This court case actually started in Missouri. If you guys, after the quarantine, St. Louis, Missouri, if you go downtown St. Louis near the Arch, the old courthouse is there. And unfortunately, the original room where the Dred Scott case was originally heard at the state level, that was burned to the ground. Now, they've actually recreated it, rebuilt that particular room, and they actually have mock trials every year around the 4th of July, if I'm not mistaken. So if we're able to get out and about 4th of July and you're looking for something cool to do, something historical to do, go check that out. Now, Dred Scott, he was actually freed in the North by his master. And I'm not going to get into the full-blown story, but moved back to Missouri, and he was suing for his freedom, and he had made it all the way to the Supreme Court. He wanted his freedom. He thought he had the right to freedom because he had been freed in the North. And the Supreme Court, they're going to blow it here. They're going to mess up, and they are going to use their own judgment, and they are not going to look at the Constitution. And this is before the Civil War, of course. And Congress, they're going to say Congress doesn't have the right to ban slavery in the states. Also, African Americans, before the Civil War, and before Reconstruction rather, they have no rights. They are not considered citizens, and they're still considered property. So this is going to be another incident that is going to ratchet up the country, and it's going to divide the country even more, and it's going to be another cause of the American Civil War. I will not lecture you guys on the American Civil War. I love the Civil War, but I don't have time for that to get through all these Supreme Court cases. So, going to restrict the rights of slaves. They're not citizens. That's the bottom line there. Now, we actually have not got to this yet in this course, but you should be familiar with this court case with American history. Plessy v. Ferguson. Now, Rosa Parks, she's kind of emulating this whole Plessy versus Ferguson thing. So Plessy Homer, the story goes, Plessy Homer, he wanted to challenge the 14th Amendment. He knew that the 14th Amendment guaranteed equal treatment, equal rights for all American citizens. Well, he didn't think it was right, and he was a mixed man, so he was actually light-skinned, and he wanted to challenge the Constitution and the laws. And at the time, African Americans were required to sit at the back of train cars. Now, he wanted to go to the front of the train car and sit there, much like Rosa Parks, and sitting at the front of the bus and refusing to get up and then getting arrested. Well, Homer Plessy is going to be arrested as well. And he's going to challenge this, and it's going to make it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, they're going to make this whole segregation thing legal. Separate but equal accommodations. So, as long as things are equal for African Americans and whites, they can separate them. Alright, so segregation is made legal by the Supreme Court. This is going to divide the country even more. Jim Crow laws are going to be pretty much established nationwide at this point. And this, you can actually start talking about the civil rights movement here. Okay, I make the argument that you can start talking about it right after or during the writing of the Constitution, because the Constitution allowed slavery to exist. So that's where I kind of started. But anyway, side note, Plessy's going to lose, and segregation is going to be the norm. So separate but equal is legal. Now, this is a World War I court case. Now, I know I might be jumping all over the place, and if we were in class, you guys would be digging into these court cases on your own, and you guys would be exploring these court cases on your own. So, Shinnick versus United States. Okay, so I'm just going to be completely honest with you guys. Shinnick, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I'm going to call him Shank. Shinnick. That's how I'm going to say it. But the story goes, he was an anarchist, and he was actually passing out anti-war, anti-draft propaganda out, and he did not support the World War I American effort. So he's passing out these leaflets and pamphlets, and he thought, I'm expressing my First Amendment rights. Well, he gets arrested, and this court case is going to make it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, they're not going to be down with this. Normally, if it wasn't during wartime, your First Amendment rights like this would be protected. At least this is what the court said in 1919. But anytime there's a clear and present danger, like if you yell fire in a movie theater and there's no fire, okay, that's illegal. You cannot do that. Now, that's still illegal today because you're presenting a danger to society, presenting danger to people when there is no danger, and you could cause panic. And the court's going to rule against Shinnick, saying you cannot distribute these pamphlets. You cannot distribute this information to the people. You cannot go against the government. You cannot go against the war effort. And he's going to be denied his First Amendment rights. And they're saying if it goes against the war effort, it's going to go against the country. You cannot protest the country and the government. Now, why is this a blunder? Well, we can express our concerns and issues with the government today. No matter if we're in wartime, peacetime, quarantine time, it doesn't matter. Now, you can't just say anything. You can't just say whatever you want, but you can speak out against your government, or you can support your government. And it goes, both ways. So think Vietnam. The Vietnam War, there were numerous protests. There were numerous people who stood up and said, hey, we don't like this thing. We don't like the way the war's going. We don't like that innocent people are dying, and we don't like that American soldiers are dying. And for what? So this court case is not really a standard anymore. This is not a precedence for current times, modern times. So we move from World War I to World War II. This court case is very infamous. You should have studied it in American history. I hope you did. Korematsu versus the United States. So Fred Korematsu, he is forced onto a Japanese internment camp. He's a Japanese American, and he's lived in the United States for quite some time. He had his own business, and when he's forced to move onto this internment camp, he loses his business. He loses his private property. Well, he's very upset about this, and he doesn't want to be on this internment camp, and he ends up suing the United States. And obviously, this is a huge blunder, huge error on the Supreme Court's behalf. The United States government has actually gone out and said that this is bad, and they've actually reached out to Korematsu. He's actually passed away now, and tried to compensate this whole thing, and trying to reconcile this whole issue. It's debatable whether or not you agree with what we did afterwards. That's your decision. Do your research on that. Look it up. But the court, they are going to rule in favor of the United States. So they're going to, kind of similar to Shinnick, they're going to say that we have to protect our country during wartime. And these Japanese Americans, their rights are going to be restricted to protect our country. There was a thought that a lot of these Japanese Americans on the West Coast were spies, or they supported the Japanese military, Japanese army. Now, that was totally untrue, and a lot of these Japanese Americans forced onto these internment camps really for no reason. And the court is going to claim that it's not a racial issue, but it's because we were at war with Japan. Again, this is a hard one to talk about, and I recommend you guys look up and check out a few things about Korematsu versus United States. So those are the blunders. Now we're going to run through some court cases where civil rights and civil liberties have been expanded for U.S. citizens. There's a lot out there. Like I said in my intro, guys, I picked the most important ones, the ones that have left a really big impact on you and a big impact on our country. And there are a couple controversial ones in here. And when I'm talking about these, I'm just going to tell you guys the facts. I'm just going to tell you guys what happened. And I will not interject any opinions. I will not interject any issues. And I always tell you guys this. You guys will make the decisions for yourselves. You had to come up with your own decisions. You had to make the decision for yourself. I can't tell you how to think. Your parents can't tell you how to think. The government can't tell you how to think. You have to make the decision for yourself. And you make informed decisions. And when you all become 18 years old, you can vote. And you can make informed decisions and decide how our government's going to go through your vote. And yeah, so keep that in mind when we're talking about a couple of these court cases. So, we talked about Plessy versus Ferguson and how that made segregation legal. Well, Brown versus Board of Education, this isn't going to overturn segregation as a whole, but it's going to overturn segregation in schools. So Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, basically all schools have to be segregated. And Linda Brown, they won this court case. The NAACP was heavily involved, and they were very smart about who they're going to target and when they were going to try to bring this court case to the Supreme Court. And huge moment for the civil rights movement, and this kind of jumpstarts the civil rights movement to formally end segregation across the board. Segregation would not end. This was in 1954. Segregation would not formally end until 1964 with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Excuse me. Whew. Sorry, guys. And segregation would not end until 1964. And then, of course, we also have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, we will study the Civil Rights Movement. That'll be our next topic of discussion and next lecture series after we're done with the Supreme Court. Now, this was a huge moment in our country. Map v. Ohio. This is a pretty funny one, but it's an important one. Okay, so Map, she was a little old lady, and she kind of hung out with the wrong crowd a little bit. And you can make that decision for yourself, that observation for yourself. But the police, they were looking for someone she kind of knew, kind of hung around. And she wouldn't let the police in. She wouldn't let the police in. She knew her rights. She knew her Fourth Amendment rights. And the police just barged in to her home without a warrant. They were looking for this particular individual, and he wasn't there. Obviously, she wasn't in trouble with the law there, but they searched her home anyway. Well, they actually went into her bedroom, looking through her stuff. I'm not making this up. And you had to consider this is 1960s, early 1960s here. They found obscene materials or pornographic materials. And at the time, this was illegal in Ohio to own and have these obscene materials. Okay, so this makes it to the Supreme Court, and Mapp is actually going to win. And they found that because they searched her home without a warrant, that it was unreasonable. It was unreasonable to search and seize her belongings, her private property. Okay, and this just reinforced our Bill of Rights, civil liberties. And you have to have a warrant in order to search someone's home. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole car thing. I can actually do an entire lecture series on searches and seizures of cars and all the rights and all that stuff. If you guys really want me to, let me know. It's pretty interesting. So anyway, so Map v. Ohio, you have to have a warrant. unreasonable searches and seizures, and your Fourth Amendment rights are being reinforced here. This was a huge moment. Gideon v. Wainwright. And a lot of these issues are going to deal with your Bill of Rights, civil liberties, either not being followed or they're going to be reinforced. Okay, so Gideon, he's actually buried in Hannibal, Missouri, by the way. Gideon, he was charged with a felony in Florida, and he could not afford an attorney. He could not afford a lawyer. And we know our constitutional rights, and this was at the state level. We know our constitutional rights. You have to be provided an attorney through the Sixth Amendment. And Gideon, he's applying and writing. He's doing his research while he's in jail. He's in jail. And he is wanting to have a retrial with a fair representation. He wants an attorney provided to him at the state level. Well, he writes to the federal government, to the Supreme Court, and they grant him this decision. Excuse me. And he actually gets his own lawyer, and he wins. So this is going to establish that even at the state level, they had to provide a lawyer for you if you cannot afford it. And at the federal level as well. So your Bill of Rights, civil liberties will expand not only at the federal level, but also at the state level. All right, Miranda v. Arizona. I don't have Miranda v. Arizona on this slide, but that's what the court case is. So Miranda, he was kind of a shady guy. Do your research on him and, the issues he had with the law. But he's going to be arrested, and they're going to prosecute him. And they will not read him his rights. They will not read him his rights. And they're actually going to use a confession that he says that basically they forced out of him. They coerced that out of him. They forced that confession out of him. And that is heavily illegal. Okay, now the court was actually split on this decision based on the character of Miranda and who he was and what he had been doing. But he's gonna get off. He's going to win this trial, and now you probably have seen it on television or whatever. Your rights have to be read to you. Okay, and your rights, when you are arrested, you have to be told why you're being arrested, the charges against you, and your rights to an attorney, and your rights to remain silent, pleading the Fifth. We went over that with the Bill of Rights. So this is huge. This is going to protect you if you ever get arrested. If they don't read you your rights, you may end up winning that court case. Moral of the story, don't get arrested. All right, so these next two are the controversial ones. And like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on the history or my thoughts on these two court cases. Again, you probably have heard of these court cases, or at least the concepts behind them. And there are a lot of different thoughts on them today. There's a lot of controversy still surrounding these court cases today. And again, I'm just going to be kind of a straight shooter, straight down the line, and kind of tell you guys the facts. Okay, so abortion and Roe v. Wade. So Roe v. Wade, before 1973, abortion was illegal. And there were a lot of unsafe practices, unsafe abortion practices. Also, doctors were doing it illegally. And Norma. I'm not sure how to say her last name. McCorvey. Yeah, McCorvey. She's actually going to sue in Texas, in the deep South, conservative South, that, she gets an abortion and, she's arrested and all that stuff, but she's going to challenge it down there. And it's going to make it all the way to the Supreme Court. Texas is actually going to rule against her, and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to rule that abortion is legal and it's constitutional. And the reason there's actually, this is a kind of a very complicated court case, but I'll give you the very bare minimum understanding of how the Supreme Court made their decision, came to the conclusion. They felt like a woman's body, a woman's right to get an abortion, it's based off your right to privacy. And the government does not own your body. The government does not decide what you can or cannot do with your body. It's up to you. It's your decision on what you want to do with your body. So your Fourth Amendment rights, right to privacy, was huge with Roe v. Wade. So abortion is legal and it still stands today. Oberfell v. Hodges. This is another one of those controversial issues that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, and you should know this concept anyway. So, gay marriage. Gay marriage was illegal in some states, and gay marriage had been a very controversial topic up to this point. What was legal? How can the state define marriage? And is it a religious thing? Etc. So there were a lot of people that did not agree with this, and did not agree that same-sex marriage should happen in the United States. Now, the courts, they're going to rule, they're going to be split, okay, because you're going to have some judges that are very conservative, and they're going to think that this is immoral or whatever, for whatever reason. And the courts are going to make the decision based off of the 14th Amendment, stating that everyone should be treated the same. Everyone should have equal protection of the laws, regardless of if you are gay or straight or whatever. So, gay marriage is going to be legal in all 50 states and territories after this Supreme Court decision. And this is still in effect to today. This is a really recent court case, 2015. So there's same-sex marriage. Now, I'm going to stop it there. It's kind of a shorter lecture, but I did not want to draw this lecture out with adding in the rights for students. I'm going to do that next week, and that'll be actually a shorter lecture as well. That'll be about 30 minutes or so. Now, if you want to get to the most important court cases, here you go. So, Brown versus Board of Education overturns Plessy v. Ferguson in schools. Okay. Roe v. Wade, right to an abortion. Miranda v. Arizona. You had to have your rights read to you. Okay, so next week I'm going to cover, like I told you guys, your rights in schools. And it's pretty interesting. I'm not going to lie. You should enjoy it. And you'll see what you can do in schools and what gives rights to administrators. To say, like, search your bag or your stuff or whatever, and there's limitations to that too. We'll get to that. And then also, what role does religion play in school or doesn't play in school? We'll get to that as well, and prayer and all that stuff, and how some things you cannot do, or rather the school cannot do. So yeah. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I want you guys to stay safe, be safe, make good decisions. protect yourself. Make sure you are obeying the governor, the stay-at-home order. And I will see you next time. If you guys have questions, email me. You can also leave comments on Google Classroom, and I'll communicate with you guys. Anyway, if you want to do some Google Meets, I can do that. I'm doing a weekly Google Meets with all my classes, and just make sure you're staying on track of what's being said in Google Classroom. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching, and stay safe.